One of them died after years of unbearable physical pain, hidden far away from the Hollywood spotlight that once adored her. Another spent decades fighting emotional wounds so deep that even fame could not save her from them. One beloved cast member watched his body collapse while millions of fans still saw him as America's perfect father. And behind the comforting world of Little House on the Prairie, behind the soft music, family dinners, and golden fields, there were real lives slowly falling apart in silence. For millions of Americans, Little House was never just a television show. It was safety. It was childhood. It was the feeling of sitting beside your family while the world outside suddenly felt quieter for 1 hour every week. Audiences trusted these people. They laughed with them, cried with them, grew older with them. The cast became part of America's emotional memory itself. But while viewers were watching stories about love, faith, hardship, and survival inside Walnut Grove, many of the actors were quietly facing battles far darker than anything written into the scripts. Child stardom shattered identities. Fame destroyed privacy. Relationships collapsed under pressure. Addiction crept into lives nobody expected. And for some of them, the emotional scars never healed at all. Because Hollywood has always loved innocence. But once those children grow older, the industry often leaves them behind without mercy. Some members of the cast disappeared completely after the camera stopped rolling. Others became trapped forever inside characters they could never escape. And a few suffered heartbreaking endings so tragic that longtime fans still struggle to talk about them today. There were devastating illnesses, loneliness, financial struggles, private trauma, hidden behind smiling interviews, and deaths that made audiences feel like they had lost members of their own family. Because somehow, Little House on the Prairie became something much deeper than television. It became a reflection of life itself. Beautiful, fragile, temporary, and perhaps that is why the tragedies surrounding this cast hurt so much even now. The audience never stopped loving them, but time did what time always does. It moved on, and by the end of this story you may never look at Walnut Grove the same way again. When Little House on the Prairie first appeared on television in 1974, America instantly felt something rare. The country was changing fast. Families were becoming more divided. Television was becoming louder, darker, and more cynical. But Little House arrived like a memory from another world. A world where kindness still mattered, and families survived hardship together. The opening alone became unforgettable. Children running through endless fields beneath soft violin music. Sunlight covering the prairie. A father building a life with his bare hands while his daughters watched him like he could fix anything. For millions of viewers, Little House did not feel like fiction. It felt personal. Every week, families gathered together in living rooms across America to watch the Ingalls family fight through poverty, brutal winters, heartbreak, and loss. Parents trusted the show. Grandparents loved it. Children cried during the emotional episodes without fully understanding why they hurt so deeply. Because beneath its gentle surface, Little House on the Prairie was often devastatingly human. It spoke about blindness, death, addiction, loneliness, grief, fear, and emotional suffering in ways most family television at the time would never dare attempt. That honesty became the soul of the series. Michael Landon did not simply play Charles Ingalls. To millions of viewers, he became the father they wished they had. Melissa Gilbert became America's little sister, wild, emotional, vulnerable, and impossible not to love. Melissa Sue Anderson brought quiet heartbreak to Mary Ingalls, especially during the tragic blindness storyline that still leaves viewers emotional decades later. And actors like Victor French and Matthew Laborteaux gave the series something even deeper, pain that felt real. That emotional realism is why audiences never forgot the show. People saw pieces of their own families inside Walnut Grove. Some remember watching the series beside parents who are gone now. Others remember hearing the theme music while sitting on the floor as children. And perhaps that nostalgia is exactly what makes the real-life tragedies of the cast feel so painful today. Because while audiences remember warmth and comfort, many of the actors themselves were quietly carrying enormous emotional weight behind the scenes. Some struggled with the pressure of becoming famous too young. Others found themselves trapped forever inside the characters that made them beloved. And as the years passed, several members of the cast would discover the cruelest truth about Hollywood. The world loves child stars while they remain frozen in innocence. But once they grow older, many are left completely alone. For millions of people, Melissa Gilbert will always be Laura Ingalls. The fearless little girl sprinting through open fields with dirt on her shoes and emotion written all over her face became one of the most beloved child stars in television history. Week after week, audiences watched her laugh, cry, rebel, and grow up on Little House on the Prairie as if she were part of their own family. And that emotional connection became incredibly powerful. Viewers did not simply watch Laura Ingalls. They protected her in their hearts. Children wanted to be her. Parents saw innocence in her. And America slowly turned Melissa Gilbert into something far larger than a normal actress. She became a symbol of childhood itself. But behind the scenes, Melissa was growing up inside an industry that often destroys the very innocence it sells to the audience. Long filming schedules became normal before she was even old enough to fully understand fame. Emotional scenes were constant. Public attention followed her everywhere. And while millions of viewers saw the cheerful daughter of Walnut Grove every week, Melissa herself was slowly learning how dangerous Hollywood could become for a child star. The pressure to remain lovable never disappeared. Neither did the pressure to remain young. As Little House became one of the biggest shows in America, Melissa's identity slowly fused with Laura Ingalls in the minds of the public. Audiences struggled separating the actress from the character, and over time that became emotionally exhausting, because no real person can remain frozen as America's perfect little girl forever. Eventually, Melissa entered adulthood while the audience still wanted Laura, and that transition became painful. Hollywood changed around her quickly. The wholesome image that made her famous suddenly limited the kinds of roles she could pursue. At the same time, tabloids became obsessed with her personal life, especially her highly publicized relationship with actor Rob Lowe. To the public, their romance looked glamorous. Privately, it became emotionally destructive. Melissa later admitted that the relationship left deep emotional scars. She believed they were building a future together, but heartbreak eventually replaced the fantasy Hollywood magazines tried to sell. And after years of pressure, failed relationships, public scrutiny, and emotional insecurity, Melissa slowly began struggling with something many former child stars understand too well: not knowing who you are without the role that made the world love you. As the years passed, she also became increasingly honest about the darker realities of aging in Hollywood. Cosmetic procedures, impossible beauty standards, constant comparison. Eventually she admitted she reached a point where she barely recognized herself anymore. The little girl America once saw as pure innocence was quietly losing herself, trying to survive an industry obsessed with image. At times, even her physical health began collapsing under years of stress and chronic pain. But perhaps what makes Melissa Gilbert's story so emotional is that she survived long enough to finally tell the truth. Instead of pretending everything was perfect, she slowly stepped away from the Hollywood illusion. She spoke openly about insecurity, emotional pain, aging, addiction culture inside entertainment, and the enormous psychological cost of child stardom. And fans who see her today often notice something different in her now. Not sadness, not bitterness, just honesty. The kind that only comes from surviving decades of pressure, while millions of strangers watched your entire life unfold in public. But while Melissa Gilbert eventually found some peace away from the spotlight, another Little House star was quietly slipping deeper into isolation. And her story would become one of the saddest in the entire legacy of the show. If Melissa Gilbert became the emotional center of Little House on the Prairie, then Melissa Sue Anderson became its tragedy. Quiet, gentle, fragile. As Mary Ingalls, she carried a sadness in her performances that audiences immediately connected to. Even during happy scenes, there was something deeply vulnerable about her presence on screen, something that made viewers want to protect her. And when the series transformed Mary's life forever through blindness, audiences were devastated. Those episodes became some of the most emotional moments in television history. Millions watched a young girl lose her future piece by piece while her family stood helpless beside her. The fear in her voice felt real. The heartbreak in her silence felt real. And perhaps that is why viewers never forgot those scenes decades later. Because Melissa Sue Anderson made suffering feel human. But behind the cameras, her own emotional experience on Little House was becoming increasingly difficult. Unlike Melissa Gilbert, who naturally connected with public attention, Anderson was far more private and introverted. Fame did not energize her. It isolated her. While the show exploded in popularity across America, she often felt emotionally disconnected from the world surrounding it. Long work schedules, public expectations, constant recognition over time, the pressure slowly pushed her inward instead of outward. And as years passed, the line between Mary Ingalls and Melissa Sue Anderson began disappearing in the eyes of the public. Fans no longer saw an actress. They saw tragedy itself. Interviewers constantly asked her about the blindness storyline. Viewers emotionally attached her to pain, vulnerability, and suffering. Even after the series ended, audiences continued revisiting those devastating episodes over and over again. And perhaps without realizing it, America trapped her inside the saddest version of Mary forever. After Little House ended, Anderson continued acting for a short time, but Hollywood itself was changing rapidly. The softer emotional storytelling of the 1970s was fading away. Television became faster, louder, and more cynical. Roles for actresses associated with wholesome family television became increasingly limited. Then something surprising happened. Melissa Sue Anderson quietly disappeared. No public meltdown, no scandals, no desperate attempts to remain famous. She simply walked away from Hollywood almost entirely. To many fans, her disappearance felt mysterious, but to others, it felt heartbreaking in a completely different way. Because sometimes the people most damaged by fame are not the ones who self-destruct publicly. Sometimes they are the ones who disappear silently. Anderson later admitted she never truly enjoyed celebrity culture. Privacy became more valuable to her than recognition. Stability mattered more than attention. She focused on raising her family far away from the machinery of Hollywood that had consumed so much of her youth, but nostalgia never released her completely. Even today, audiences still watch those painful Little House episodes and immediately remember her face, the fear in her eyes, the quiet emotional collapse in scenes where Mary lost her sight, her independence, and eventually pieces of herself. And strangely enough, those heartbreaking moments became part of what made Little House so unforgettable. The show understood something few family dramas ever mastered. People remember emotional pain far longer than happiness. And Melissa Sue Anderson gave audiences some of the most emotionally painful moments television had ever seen. But while she escaped Hollywood quietly, another young member of the cast would face a much darker emotional struggle. One involving childhood trauma, isolation, and years of silent suffering hidden behind a television smile. To Little House on the Prairie fans, Matthew Laborteaux will always be Albert Ingalls. The troubled orphan boy with intelligent eyes and hidden sadness quickly became one of the show's most emotional characters. Audiences watched Charles Ingalls take him in, guide him, and love him like a son. And over time, Albert's pain became some of the darkest storytelling the series ever attempted, especially when addiction entered his life. The morphine storyline shocked audiences across. Watching a young boy slowly destroy himself through dependency felt terrifyingly real for a family television show during that era. The fear in Albert's eyes, the shame, the desperation, it all felt disturbingly authentic. What most viewers did not know was that Matthew Laborteaux had already spent much of his real childhood fighting battles of his own. Long before Little House made him famous, Matthew faced serious developmental and medical challenges after being adopted as a baby. According to those close to him, there were moments early in life when doctors believed he might never function normally. Speech difficulties, neurological struggles, social isolation, even basic communication became difficult during parts of his childhood. But somehow, against overwhelming odds, he slowly adapted, and acting became his escape. By the time he arrived on Little House, Matthew already understood emotional struggle in ways most children never should. Perhaps that is why Albert felt so believable to audiences. The sadness was not completely fictional. Unlike some young stars who naturally thrived under fame, Matthew carried a deep emotional sensitivity beneath the surface. Cast members often described him as intelligent, quiet, thoughtful, and emotionally intense. There was always a feeling that he experienced the world differently from the people around him. And as Little House grew more successful, the pressure surrounding the younger actors only became heavier. The show consumed their lives, their identities, their childhoods. For years, Walnut Grove became their entire world. Then suddenly, it ended. And for many child actors, that kind of loss creates emotional confusion difficult to explain to ordinary people. One day, millions recognize your face everywhere. The next day, the world slowly moves on, while you are still trying to understand who you became inside the process. Matthew continued acting after Little House, especially in voice work, but he gradually pulled away from the spotlight. Unlike some former child stars whose struggles exploded publicly, his pain became quieter, internal, invisible, and in some ways, even more heartbreaking because of that silence. Fans who revisit old interviews often notice a heaviness in him when discussing childhood fame, almost as if he understands something painful about growing up too early inside an industry built on illusion. Because Hollywood loves child stars, while they remain useful to the fantasy. But once the cameras stop rolling, many are left carrying emotional damage nobody prepared them for. Still, Matthew Laborteaux survived. And for longtime Little House fans, that survival means something deeply emotional. Because by the time the series ended, tragedy was already beginning to surround the cast in ways nobody could stop. And then came the loss that completely shattered America's heart: the death of Michael Landon. To millions of viewers, Michael Landon was not simply an actor. He was comfort, strength, safety. As Charles Ingalls, he became the television father an entire generation trusted more than almost anyone else on screen. Week after week, audiences watched him protect his family through blizzards, poverty, grief, and heartbreak with a warmth that felt completely genuine. Children believed him, parents admired him, families cried during his speeches. And over time, Michael Landon stopped feeling like a Hollywood celebrity altogether. He felt real. That emotional connection is exactly why his downfall hurt America so deeply. Behind the scenes, Landon was far more than the star of Little House on the Prairie. He was heavily involved in writing, directing, producing, and shaping nearly every emotional layer of the series. Cast members often described him as charismatic, demanding, perfectionistic, funny, and emotionally complicated all at once. The pressure surrounding him became enormous, because Little House was not simply a television show anymore. It had become part of American culture itself. And while audiences saw the image of the perfect husband and father on screen, Landon's real personal life slowly became far messier than viewers imagined. Eventually, his marriage collapsed publicly after he began a relationship with a much younger makeup artist while still married. The scandal exploded across tabloids and shocked longtime fans who had emotionally fused Michael Landon with Charles Ingalls in their minds. Suddenly, the image cracked. For some viewers, it felt personal. The man they trusted no longer matched the man in the headlines. And yet somehow, audiences could never fully stop loving him. Because despite the controversy, Landon still carried something rare on screen: human warmth. Even after Little House ended, he continued creating successful television projects and remained deeply connected to audiences. But beneath the confidence and humor, those close to him later admitted he worked at an exhausting pace, almost as if slowing down frightened him. Then in 1991, everything changed. Michael Landon was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The news devastated America overnight. At the time, pancreatic cancer was considered one of the deadliest diagnoses imaginable. The man audiences saw as invincible suddenly appeared fragile, exhausted, and frighteningly human. And what happened next became one of the most heartbreaking public declines television fans had ever witnessed. Instead of hiding from the disease, Landon faced it publicly. Millions watched interviews where he tried to remain optimistic while his body visibly weakened month after month. The strong father figure who once comforted America now looked painfully vulnerable himself. For many fans, it was unbearable to watch, because for the first time, Charles Ingalls could not save anyone, not even himself. Television networks constantly updated audiences on his condition. Former cast members struggled emotionally as they watched the man who had once held the entire Little House family together slowly fade away. And then, only months after revealing his diagnosis, Michael Landon died at just 54 years old. The reaction was enormous. Not because Hollywood lost a star, but because America lost part of its emotional childhood. Even decades later, longtime fans still become emotional hearing his voice in old episodes. There is something painfully sincere about him on screen, the way he smiles at his daughters, the way he comforts people, the quiet sadness hidden beneath his strength. It no longer feels like acting. It feels like memory. And perhaps that is what makes his death so haunting even now. The man who taught millions of viewers about love, kindness, and family was gone far too soon. But as heartbreaking as Michael Landon's story became, another tragedy connected to Little House on the Prairie would grow even darker, because one cast member spent years hiding unimaginable pain behind the smile of one of television's most unforgettable characters. For millions of viewers, Nellie Oleson was the girl everyone loved to hate, spoiled, cruel, manipulative. With her perfect curls and mocking smile, Alison Arngrim created one of the most unforgettable television villains of the 1970s. Audiences screamed at their televisions because of her. Children despised her. And every time Laura Ingalls fought back against Nellie, fans across America celebrated. She became iconic. But behind the scenes, Alison Arngrim was hiding pain so severe that almost nobody around her fully understood it. While audiences laughed at Nellie's tantrums and cruelty, Alison herself was enduring years of abuse and emotional trauma during childhood. The contrast feels almost impossible to comprehend now. The girl making millions laugh on television was privately surviving experiences that left deep psychological scars for years afterward. And somehow, she kept performing, kept smiling, kept pretending everything was normal, because that is what Hollywood often teaches young actors to do. Protect the image, hide the pain, never let the audience see the damage underneath. As Little House on the Prairie became more successful, Alison's performance as Nellie only grew more legendary. She played cruelty so convincingly that many viewers genuinely believed she must be mean in real life, too. Children insulted her in public. Fans treated her like the character. Some people could not separate the actress from the role at all. For a child already carrying severe emotional trauma, that kind of attention became deeply isolating. And yet, Alison survived something that destroys many former child stars. Silence. For years she carried her experiences privately, while the world remembered her only as television's favorite bully. But eventually something changed. She decided to tell the truth, publicly, honestly, painfully. As an adult, Alison Arngrim became one of the most outspoken former child actors discussing abuse, trauma, survival, and the emotional damage hidden beneath Hollywood's polished surface. Her honesty shocked many longtime fans because Little House had always represented innocence to the public. But Alison forced people to confront a painful reality. Even inside the most comforting television worlds, real human suffering still existed behind the cameras. And strangely enough, her openness made audiences respect her even more. Because unlike Hollywood's carefully controlled image machine, Alison stopped pretending perfection existed. She admitted the pain, the fear, the emotional damage. And perhaps for the first time, audiences began seeing the real woman behind Nellie Oleson. Not the villain, not the spoiled brat. Just someone who survived extraordinary darkness while the entire world believed she was living a dream. That truth changed the way many fans viewed Little House forever. Because once you understand what some cast members were privately enduring during filming, certain scenes become difficult to watch the same way again. The smiles feel more fragile, the laughter feels sadder, and the innocence feels heartbreakingly temporary. But the emotional tragedies surrounding Little House on the Prairie were still far from over. Because while some cast members battled private trauma, others slowly watched fame disappear entirely. And for many of them, the years after Hollywood became their loneliest chapter of all. For a long time, the cast of Little House on the Prairie lived inside one of the safest worlds television had ever created. Every week, millions of people welcomed them into their homes. Their faces became familiar, trusted, Laborteaux. But television fame creates a dangerous illusion. It convinces act and rebel, especially young actors, that the emotional connection will last forever. And then one day, the cameras stop rolling. The sets disappear. The audience grows older. Hollywood moves on to younger faces. And suddenly, the silence becomes overwhelming. For many members of the Little House cast, that silence became one of the hardest parts of all. Because, while the audience continued replaying old memories of Walnut Grove, the actors themselves were struggling to build ordinary lives outside the characters that defined them. Some found work. Some quietly disappeared from the industry. Others spent years trapped between nostalgia and reality, endlessly recognized for roles they played decades earlier, while privately fighting emotional exhaustion, financial instability, aging, or loneliness. And perhaps that was the cruelest part. The world preserved them forever in one perfect moment of innocence. But real life kept moving. Bodies changed. Careers faded. Friends died. Families broke apart. And one by one, beloved members of the Little House family slowly disappeared from the world that once adored them. Victor French died after battling lung cancer. Richard Bull passed away quietly after years away from the spotlight. Catherine McGregor spent much of her later life in seclusion before her death at age 93. Dabbs Greer, forever remembered, as Reverend Alden, slowly faded from public life before passing away in 2007. And every loss felt strangely personal to longtime fans. Because Little House was never just entertainment. People emotionally lived inside that world. The cast became attached to childhood memories, lost parents, family traditions, and emotional comfort during difficult times in people's lives. Which is why even today, hearing the Little House theme music can instantly bring viewers to tears. Not simply because they miss the actors, but because they miss who they were when they first watched them. And perhaps the surviving cast members understand that sadness better than anyone. As the years passed, several former stars began speaking more honestly about aging, emotional survival, and the hidden psychological cost of becoming frozen forever inside America's memory. Melissa Gilbert admitted she eventually grew tired of chasing impossible beauty standards. Alison Arngrim openly discussed trauma and survival. Others chose complete privacy instead, retreating far away from Hollywood altogether. But whether they embraced nostalgia or escaped from it, all of them carried the same truth. None of their lives unfolded the way audiences imagined. Because behind every beloved television family exists something viewers rarely see. Real people, real pain, real fear, real loneliness. And perhaps that hidden humanity is exactly why Little House on the Prairie still feels so emotionally powerful after all these decades. The show understood suffering because many of the people creating it understood suffering too. And by the end, the cast itself became a reflection of the very lesson Little House had always been teaching all along. Nothing beautiful lasts forever. Decades have passed since Little House on the Prairie ended. Entire generations have grown older. Television changed. Hollywood changed. America changed. And yet somehow, Little House never disappeared. The reruns continued. New audiences discovered Walnut Grove. Children who once watched the series beside their parents eventually introduced it to families of their own. And through all those years, the emotional connection only became deeper. Because Little House was never truly about prairie life. It was about loss, about love, about growing older, about trying to hold families together while time slowly takes everything away. That is why the tragedies surrounding the cast feel so devastating even now. The audience did not simply admire these actors. They emotionally depended on them during certain periods of life. For many viewers, Michael Landon represented safety during childhood. Melissa Gilbert represented innocence. Victor French represented warmth and flawed humanity. And when audiences later watched those same actors struggle with illness, heartbreak, aging, or death, it felt painfully personal. Almost like losing people they had actually known. Perhaps that emotional attachment explains why fans still travel across America to visit Little House filming locations and reunions decades later. Some cry meeting surviving cast members. Others bring photographs from childhood or memories connected to family members who are now gone, because for them, Little House became attached to something sacred, memory itself. And maybe that is why the cast's suffering resonates so deeply today. The show promised emotional comfort, but real life gave many of its stars something very different. Some carried private trauma for decades. Some became emotionally trapped inside characters they could never escape. Others spent years quietly fading from public attention, while the audience still remembered them as young forever. And perhaps no tragedy is sadder than that contradiction. To the viewers, the cast remains frozen in sunlight, running through fields, laughing beside wooden fences, sharing family dinners around candlelight. But in reality, those children grew older, their bodies changed, their friendships shifted, their health declined, and one by one, many of the beloved faces that defined Walnut Grove disappeared forever. Yet despite all the heartbreak surrounding the cast, something beautiful survived. The emotional honesty of the series itself, because Little House on the Prairie understood a truth modern television often forgets. People do not remember perfection. They remember vulnerability. They remember comfort during painful moments in life. They remember stories that made them feel less alone. And maybe that is why the series still touches audiences so deeply after all these years. Not because it showed a perfect world, but because underneath all the warmth and nostalgia, it understood how fragile life really is. And perhaps that fragile humanity is the true reason Little House on the Prairie never faded away. Today, when people revisit Little House on the Prairie, they are not simply watching an old television series. They are returning to a feeling. A quieter time, a safer time, a version of life that now feels painfully distant. The music still sounds gentle. The sunsets still glow across the prairie. Laura Ingalls still runs through those endless fields as if childhood could last forever. But now, there is something else hidden inside those scenes. Sadness. Because audiences know what happened afterward. They know many of the smiling faces on screen were carrying invisible pain behind the cameras. They know some of those children would grow older struggling with loneliness, trauma, identity, or the emotional scars of fame. And they know several beloved members of the Little House family are gone forever now. Michael Landon, Victor French, Richard Bull, Dabbs Greer, Catherine McGregor. Others survived, but not unchanged. Melissa Gilbert eventually walked away from Hollywood's obsession with youth and perfection. Melissa Sue Anderson disappeared into private life, far from the spotlight that once defined her childhood. Alison Arngrim transformed years of hidden suffering into honesty and survival. And Matthew Laborteaux quietly carried the emotional weight of growing up inside one of America's most beloved television worlds. Time touched all of them, just like it touches everyone. And perhaps that is the real reason Little House on the Prairie still hurts people emotionally after all these decades. Because underneath the stories about pioneers and family life, the series was always about something universal. How quickly life changes, how fragile happiness is, how impossible it becomes to hold on to the people and moments we love forever. That truth feels even more painful now because the audience itself has grown older too. Many fans who once watched the show beside parents or grandparents are now the older generation themselves. Some revisit episodes searching for comfort. Others hear the theme music and instantly remember family members who are no longer here. And suddenly, Little House becomes more than nostalgia. It becomes grief, memory, love, the passage of time itself. But despite every tragedy connected to the cast, the legacy of the show somehow remains beautiful. Because these actors gave audiences something rare, something honest. They made people feel safe. They made families cry together. They reminded millions of viewers that kindness, love, and emotional resilience still mattered in a difficult world. And even now, decades later, that emotional connection refuses to disappear. The laughter faded. The cameras stopped rolling. And many of the faces that built Walnut Grove are gone. But somewhere, in living rooms across America, Little House on the Prairie still plays softly in the background. And for a brief moment, the world feels warm again.